Rejection hurts because we don't experience it as information. We experience it as a verdict, like it's saying something about our worth, our timing, or who we are. But most rejection isn't personal. It just feels personal because we attached meaning to the outcome. When you get rejected, your mind immediately fills in the blanks. I wasn't enough. I misread everything. I should have been different. But rejection rarely says, "You are wrong." It usually says, "This doesn't fit." And there's a difference. I think what makes rejection so painful is how final it feels in the moment, like a door slamming shut. But most doors that close aren't protecting the other side. They're protecting you from walking into something that would have required you to shrink. We don't like hearing that because it doesn't soften the sting immediately. But when I look back at my own rejections, the ones that hurt the most were the ones I romanticized. The jobs I imagined would fix everything. The people I believed would complete me. The opportunities I thought were the one. So when they said no, it didn't just reject the moment. It rejected a future I had already lived in my head. And that's devastating. But that future wasn't real. It was a projection. Rejection interrupts fantasies, and that interruption feels like loss. But what we often miss is what rejection prevents. It prevents you from forcing alignment, from begging for acceptance, from staying where you're tolerated, not chosen. Rejection saves you from living a life that looks okay on the outside, but feels wrong internally. It doesn't feel like redirection at first. It feels like humiliation, like embarrassment, like being exposed. But time has a way of revealing something important. The things that truly fit don't require convincing. They don't make you over-explain yourself. They don't make you doubt your instincts. They don't reject you. And the ones that do, they're not failures. They're signals. Rejection doesn't just hurt once. It echoes. Long after the moment passes, it stays in your body. You replay what you said, what you wore, how you showed up. You look for the exact second where things went wrong, and the mind always finds something. That's because rejection doesn't attack your logic. It attacks your identity. It makes you question how you're perceived. And once that doubt sets in, it bleeds into everything else. You hesitate more. You speak less. You approach life with caution. Not because you learned something useful, but because you're trying not to feel that pain again. That's how rejection shrinks people. Not by saying no, but by making them afraid to ask again. Another thing nobody really talks about is how rejection mixes with ego. We don't just want things, we want to be chosen. Chosen over others. Chosen clearly. Chosen without hesitation. So when rejection happens, it feels like proof that someone else was better. And that comparison is brutal. But here's the quiet truth. Rejection usually has more to do with timing, context, and compatibility than with value. But the ego doesn't want nuance. It wants a reason. So it turns inward. And once rejection becomes personal, it stops being a moment and becomes a narrative. I'm always the backup. I'm never the first choice. I try and it never works. That's when redirection feels impossible. Because now it's not about where you're going. It's about what you believe about yourself. And that belief is heavier than the rejection itself. I've noticed that the rejections that linger longest are the ones where I never fully showed up, where I held back, where I wasn't honest, where I played small to avoid risk. Those rejections hurt more because they leave room for doubt. Maybe if I had... But that doubt isn't clarity. It's self-punishment. Real redirection doesn't come from analyzing rejection to death. It comes from refusing to let it redefine you. If you want, part Part 3 can be about how to move forward without becoming numb or guarded, and how to let rejection redirect you without hardening your heart. I don't think the goal after rejection is to become tougher, or colder, or indifferent. That usually just means you're protecting the wound instead of healing it. Real redirection doesn't ask you to shut down. It asks you to stay open without begging. There's a difference. Rejection becomes redirection when you stop chasing validation and start listening to alignment. When you realize that being wanted matters more than being impressive. That clarity doesn't come instantly. At first, rejection just feels like loss. You need time to sit with that, to feel disappointed without turning it into a story about your worth. Because the moment you do that, you're no longer healing. You're rewriting your identity around pain. Moving forward doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop forcing. You stop trying to convince people. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You stop waiting where there's no movement. You let the no be complete. And that's hard, because closure doesn't always come with kindness. Sometimes redirection comes abruptly, without explanation, without softness. And you have to give yourself the closure you didn't get. What I've learned is that rejection often clears space. Not immediately, but eventually. Space for things that don't require you to abandon yourself. Space for connections that feel mutual, not negotiated. Space for paths that don't exhaust you just to stay on them. Rejection doesn't mean you were wrong for wanting. It just means what you wanted wasn't right there. And that distinction matters, because it allows you to keep your desire without attaching it to a single outcome. So if you've been rejected recently and it feels personal, final, or defining, let it hurt. But don't let it decide who you become. Some doors close not to punish you, but to keep you moving. Not away from something good, but toward something that fits. That's not optimism. That's perspective. And sometimes, that's enough to take the next step.